Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of the Bison Hour. I have the distinct pleasure of having one of my friends and mentors, and he's actually my father-in-law. I met him back in 2015 when he was given more or less like a sermon at church. But Bryan Christensen owns about 1,200 head of cattle.
Yeah.
On 5,400 acres here in Oklahoma.
About 5,000.
Okay, about 5,000 acres. You've owned multiple businesses in your lifetime, worked obviously multiple jobs to get to where you're at. But what I want the viewers to kind of hear today is just your story. So
cool.
If you could tell us a little bit about, how you grew up, how you were raised, and when you started to do business dealings, and kind of just give us.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll start. I grew up in a big family. My parents had 9 children. I am the oldest of 9. I'm actually tied for the oldest. I have a twin brother, my brother Aaron, and I've done a lot of work with him too. So there's 6 boys and 3 girls in our family, and I grew up in Idaho and grew up on a farm. My dad was a farmer my whole life growing up, and so I learned how to work hard, and I think that's maybe the most important thing that you can do to make you successful in life, not just in business, but anything you do. If you work hard, you are going to be successful. There's varying degrees of success, but if you're a hard worker, you're always going to find success in things that you do. So as I grew up on the farm, my dad taught me how to work hard, and we'd go out and we'd get up early in the mornings and we'd go. In Idaho, we had crops, and what we'd do is we'd have to water the crops because we didn't get nearly enough rain to.
What did you guys grow?
So we grew potatoes and sugar beets. They melt those sugar beets down and turn them into sugar that you put on your food and everything. We also grew mint, and they would take this mint oil and they'd ship it to Wrigley's in Chicago, who would make gum, like peppermint gum and stuff like that. So we grew mint, and then we grew wheat, and those were kind of our primary crops. Mm-hmm. So those crops needed to be watered because Idaho is an arid climate. So we would pump water out of wells and out of rivers and stuff like that. So then you had to get that water to the crops, and we'd do that by moving what we called hand lines, and it was just sprinklers, but you'd have to move them every day. In fact, we'd move them at 6 o'clock in the morning and then 6 p.m. at night, so they'd have 12 hours to irrigate the crop.
Are those the sprinklers with the big wheels on them?
No, that's called a wheel line, and we had those too.
Uh-huh.
Hand lines are exactly what they sound like. You use your hands. You pick them up and move them, connect them, and then you move them on down. So the wheel lines were nice because you just started a motor and they would roll themselves. Uh-huh. These hand lines you'd have to do by yourself. So they made you strong, but it was really hard work.
So 6 a.m. every day growing up?
Yeah, pretty much. During the winter, we didn't have to irrigate because we weren't really growing any crops. But yeah, during the summer and spring and fall and stuff like that. So we learned how to work hard, and I learned a lot of valuable lessons from that. Some good and some bad. Mm-hmm. Even the bad lessons teach you things. Like I learned, I don't want to move hand lines the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I didn't mind doing it, but I thought, I don't want to do this the rest of my life. But I did enjoy farming. I enjoyed being outside and working hard and being in the sun. But my dad grew almost mainly just crops. Uh-huh. So we spent all our time with crops. Well, as I got older, he bought a few cows, and I really enjoyed that part of it more than anything else. I enjoyed working with the cows and seeing the baby calves and all that. So I really enjoyed that part of it. And so I kind of thought to myself, as a young kid, I thought, I want to be a cattle rancher someday. But it's very hard to get into cattle ranching because it's so expensive. Mm-hmm. You have to... land costs money, equipment costs money, the cattle cost money. So it's a really hard thing to get into, but I wanted to do it. And so I set a goal that I would want someday be a cattle rancher and do it full time, even though I knew it was going to be really difficult to do. But you asked me earlier about a story.
Yeah, so I've been in the family, I think, almost 8 years now. And through talking with one of your brothers or something like that, we were talking about you one day, and they said, Bryan's always had a mind for business. And I was like, what do you mean? And like, even as a kid, he would make deals happen with other farmers, and he was basically just the middleman making deals and getting paid.
Yeah.
So what is that about?
So when I was about 14 years old, I was in Boy Scouts, and I had this scout leader, and he was actually a cattle rancher. He managed a big cattle ranch. And there's a product called straw, and straw is a little different than hay. They just use it for bedding. So instead of cattle laying on the hard ground or in the mud or something like that, they will use this straw to bed them down so they can lay on something soft. Well, I was talking to him and I said, how much straw do you use in a year? He said, oh, we use about 20,000 bales of straw. And I said, oh, that's cool. Do you have plenty for this year? And he said, we need about 6,000 more bales. And I said, okay. That's interesting, and I didn't think much about it. But I said, what do you guys pay for straw? And he said, we usually pay about $2 a bale. Now, straw is the byproduct of wheat. So you grow wheat, and then you bring in these big combines, and the combines come in and cut down the wheat. And all they do is keep the wheat, and that's what they make into bread and other things like that. So the straw that's left over, they usually just grind it up and spread it on the field, and then they'll disc it up, and it kind of helps the ground a little bit. Well, straw is made out of that leftover wheat. Well, I said to my dad, hey, can we, instead of grinding up that straw, can you just put it in rows for me? My dad's like, sure, I guess so. So I called this scout leader, and I said, hey, are you still needing 6,000 bales of straw? And he said, yeah. I said, will you give $2 a bale? He said, if you deliver it and stack it at my place, I'll give you $2 a bale. And I thought, 6,000 bales times $2 is $12,000. So I was like, that's pretty sweet.
And this is you at 14?
Yeah. And this is like 1986. So that much money is worth 3 times that now. So I'm like, we're talking about like $36,000 in today's money. And I'm a 14-year-old punk, right?
Right.
Anyway, so I tell my dad, hey, put it in the rows instead of spreading it. So then I call.
And at this time, you didn't tell your dad, hey, so-and-so down the road's going to pay me money
Well,
for
I
hay.
told him, I said, I might try to sell that or do something with it. He's like, I don't mind. I'll put it in a row for you. And I'm just a 14-year-old kid. He's like, what do you got up your sleeve? So then I call an uncle that I have, my Uncle Mike, and he's got a baler that bales straw into little bales. And I called him and I said, hey, I've got all this straw in rows. How much would you charge me per bale to bale it up for me? And he said, it's about 50 cents a bale. I said, okay, cool. My other uncle had all this hay equipment that he could haul hay with. So I called him, my Uncle Larry, and I said, Uncle Larry, hey, I've got this straw out in this farm. Our farm was called Swan Falls, out at Swan Falls, and I need to load it and move it to this guy's property about 8 miles away. How much can you do that for? And he said, I can do it for about 50 cents a bale. I was like, okay. So I told them both, all right, do it. So they went out and they started, and my Uncle Mike baled all this straw, and my Uncle Larry hauled it to the guy. So the guy writes me a check for $12,000 for 6,000 bales of straw. And then I pay my uncle 50 cents. So that was 3,000 to one uncle and 3,000 to another uncle. And I made $6,000, which in today's money is like $20,000.
As a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
How long from start to finish did that project take?
Well, for me, I made 4 phone calls. I mean, I'm not the one who...
Yeah.
In fact, my dad was actually a little bit mad at me.
So did you keep all the money? Did he?
So I'll tell you what happened. And it's funny because it's like I have a 14-year-old son right now.
Yeah.
If he made a couple moves and made $20,000, I'd be like, what the heck, you little punk.
Yeah.
But my dad was actually mad at me because he's like, you didn't do any work to gain that $6,000. You made a few phone calls. So I had 3 brothers that are really close in age to me. I have a twin and then a brother that's 18 months younger and then another brother 18 months younger than him. My dad made me split that $6,000 between the 4 of us. So I wrote them each a check for $1,500 because he was mad that I made all that money for myself. But I don't know what kind of a lesson he was trying to teach me, but it did teach me to share and to be kind to others and stuff like that. But that was kind of my first experience of being an entrepreneur at 14 years old.
Did the light bulb kind of go off like, I just made 4 phone calls, made, in today's money, 20 grand? Were you just, what was the motivation behind that anyway?
Money.
Was it just like?
Well, I just kind of did the math. I'm like, so if he's willing to spend $12,000 on straw, and I've already got a buyer, I just need to figure out how to get the straw. And if I can get it for less than $12,000, I'm going to make money.
Yeah.
So when I started making the calls and my uncle said, hey, I can bale it for 50 cents. Another uncle said, I can haul it for 50. I'm like, I'm going to make $1 per bale. So what it did is it kind of taught me that you can make money in so many different ways. And if you just pay attention, like I could have said, oh, that's cool. The guy needs 6,000 bales. Big deal. But instead I thought, if he needs it, somebody's going to supply it to him. It might as well be me. Even though I'm only 14 years old, I can make a few calls and see if I can make it work. So it kind of started me down the path where I thought, you know what, there's a bunch of different ways you can make money. Just be observant and keep your eyes out, and there's opportunities out there for you.
That's a really good lesson for, I think, a lot of kids or just a lot of people in general. Like, business opportunities are out there. I can't tell you how many times I've driven past a piece of real estate or something and I'm like, man, that would make a really good investment, and I didn't have the means or I didn't have the courage to find a way to make that deal happen. And what's funny is a couple months later, somebody comes in with the exact same idea and does exactly what that is. But being observant and then being willing to pull the trigger too, being willing to just make the phone call and be uncomfortable. That's something I've noticed. You have no problem going to anybody being like, hey, let's work out a business deal. So you went from growing up in Idaho, farming, and then you grew up, you went on a mission for your church, right? To southern France. Okay. You were there for 2 years.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you learned on your mission in living in France for 2 years that I guess carries over to business or entrepreneurship or anything that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said earlier, on the farm, you learn how to work. And you kind of got to learn how to work as a missionary too. You don't have anybody standing there telling you what to do. You do have a companion. The two of you work together and you spend a lot of time together. So one thing I learned is how to get along with people. You're just assigned a companion. They assign someone to be with you for 2, maybe 3 months. And you might not be best friends in the world, but you got to learn how to get along with people. And not only get along, but be really friendly and nice and have that person like you and you like them back, even though you might come from completely different backgrounds. Same is true of business. You got to get along with the people that you're in business with. People will want to do business with somebody who's kind of nice and that they can trust. Somebody that's honest. I think that's really, really important. In fact, maybe the most important thing in business. In fact, I've had a lot of employees in the past. Some are really hard workers and maybe some aren't so hard. But the one thing that I have to have is trustworthiness. Even if somebody's a little bit lazy, if I can trust them, at least I know they're not stealing from me or taking advantage of me. Whereas somebody might be a hard worker, but I don't trust them. If you can't trust them, how can you work with somebody or spend time with them when you know that you can't trust them? Anyway, so I learned that from my mission. And you have to be self-motivated too. Like I was saying, you don't have a boss when you're a missionary. Your job is to just go out and talk to people and get to know people. And we were teaching people about Jesus Christ, but one of the other things we wanted to do is just serve and help people. Spend time serving others. And so you could get up at 10 in the morning and be out the door at noon if you wanted. Nobody's going to yell at you or stop you. But we would try to follow all the rules. They had rules that they set, but there was nobody there really to enforce those rules.
Right.
So you could either obey these rules or you could just do what you wanted. And I chose to obey the rules because I thought it was important. Why am I even here on a mission if I'm just going to goof around?
Yeah.
So I worked hard. I was out early in the morning. One of the things that they did is they asked us to study French. And I wanted to be able to speak French really well and be fluent in French. Because it's hard to speak to French people if your French is no good. So I'd spend 1 hour every single morning studying French, even towards the end of my mission when I was basically completely fluent. You're never quite fluent unless you're maybe lived there for 10 or 12 years because you're speaking to somebody and they talk about the parts of a car and you get lost or something, but 99% of conversations. So learning French opened up my mind too, where it's almost like it opens up your brain to different receptors or something, and you become a smarter, more well-rounded person.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really good thing that helped me in France. And then just seeing different cultures. I know that you served a mission too in Bolivia and learned Spanish and I saw very rich people in southern France, and I saw really poor people. And I spent time with both of them. And you know what? To be totally honest, the poor people I loved because they were humble. They were easy to get along with. They were easy to talk to and to teach because they were humble. I liked the rich people too, but they were harder to talk to. And that's one lesson I learned. I thought, if I ever get a lot of money, I hope that I can remain humble and be just a good, down-to-earth person who treats others right and treats others with respect and dignity and stuff like that. So that was another thing that I learned from my mission.
How long ago was that? When did you get home from?
I got home from my mission in November of 1992. And then, kind of crazy, I was married 7 months later. Found my wife, Donna, and we got married in June of 93. So it was pretty quick.
So I talked to you about that. Part of my story is I got married really young too, and obviously you know that. But I would almost attribute a lot of my success has come because I got married at such a young age, and because Chantel and I were able to grow together. And we had a conversation, back when I was 21, and I asked you, I was like, hey, obviously you got married young, you went and got a degree, and you forbade pretty much just partying and living it up and having this free life that most young people do. I think the average 18-year-old graduates high school and wants to go to college, and the focus of college kind of turns to partying, and then it turns to I want to have fun in life, and I want to travel, and I want to enjoy, which isn't a bad lifestyle. But we talked about that. I said, do you ever regret getting married so young? Do you ever regret starting a family so young? Do you ever regret getting straight to work? And do you remember what your response was?
I don't remember that particular one.
I think you legitimately said, you're like, yeah, but all those people that spent time or wasted time partying, they're losers. And you're like, I'm so much more. That's a harsher word, but they're bums. Like They spent time, they wasted 8 to 10 years of their life until they figured out that they want to do the exact same thing that I do. And by that time, you were light years ahead of, anybody your age. So when you got home from your mission, you got married to Donna. And then did you went and got a degree at Boise State, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's kind of crazy. I got home from my mission and started up in school in January. And I wanted to get married and have a bunch of kids. That's just what I wanted to do. It's not necessarily religious or anything. I just wanted a bunch of kids, and I love children. I wanted to be married. So I found Donna, fell in love, got married to her.
Yeah.
And I knew that I wanted to start a family and that I wouldn't be able to just spend a ton of time. I can't do college for 6 years. It would just take too long. So I took about 24 credits per semester, and I graduated in 3 years. Not 3.5. I didn't have any AP classes in high school or anything like that. I just took 24 credits a semester and got it done. In the meantime, we had 3 kids while I was going to school. Actually, 2, and we were expecting the 3rd. Your wife, Chantel, was our first child, and then we had Lyndon while I was still going to school. And I think I look back at it now and think that it was a sacrifice, which it was. But it was fun. I loved having little kids and being married and all of that. So it's not like I look back and say, oh, I missed out on all the partying, because I enjoyed my life.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think, were there fun things that single people do that I kind of missed out on? Maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
But anytime you're doing something, you're missing out on something else, right? So it's just part of life. And when I look back at that, I think, thank goodness I did what I did. I mean, you think about people, investment strategists say, the sooner you start investing, the more you're going to have for retirement in the end.
Right.
So that's kind of the attitude I had. The sooner I start a family, the happier I'll be. The sooner I start working hard, the sooner I'll reap the benefit from that. Sooner I graduate from college, the sooner I can get on with my life and start doing some of the things that I really want to do. So, you know, I think the definition of sacrifice is giving up something now for something better in the future. And that's what I did. I thought, I'll give up kind of my time and hard work right now so that later on in life I can enjoy the benefits of that. And even now, it's awesome. I'm fairly young. I'm 51 years old, and I already have 6 grandkids, and all of my kids are getting older, and I love spending time with them and all that. So I have reaped the benefit of maybe what you'd consider a sacrifice when I was younger.
That's awesome. So in college, 3 kids, finally graduate. Did you go back to Idaho, or where? So you were in Idaho, obviously, but did you go back home to start farming with your dad? Or
yeah. So I was at Boise State, and I graduated in basically December of '95. And my dad said, hey, come out and work on the farm. And I enjoyed the farm work. I didn't necessarily want to do the grunt labor for the rest of my life, but I enjoyed being on the farm. So I went out and started farming with my dad. He was just half an hour away from Boise State. So I just moved out there, took our kids, and we started farming. Well, I was farming with him. He paid me, and I started my own little farm, and not making a whole lot of money, but a little bit, and progressing along. And my dad basically said, after about a year and a half, he's like, you know what? I really want to focus more on cattle than on the crops and stuff. But land in Idaho got so expensive that he basically couldn't afford to run cattle in Idaho.
Sure.
So he put this ad in the Angus Journal. Now, Angus is a breed of cattle that we raised.
Right.
So he put an ad in the Angus Journal saying, I'm looking for a cattle ranch that I can buy. This guy from Fort Smith, Arkansas, calls him up out of the blue and says, I've got this cattle ranch for sale down here. My dad flew down there. He's 48, 49 years old, and he just buys the ranch. And he decides, I'm moving to Arkansas. We're all like, you are crazy. Because he had all his family in Idaho. All his brothers and sisters were in Idaho. Plus his kids, you know, me and my siblings, we were all in Idaho. And he's just going to suddenly up and move to Arkansas?
Yeah.
We thought it was crazy. But at the same time, you kind of respect him. It's like, go do it, man.
He's chasing his dream.
Yeah. He's like, I want to do cattle. So he moves to Arkansas. And I don't like cold weather very well. So we're up in Idaho, and it's freezing cold all winter long. He'd call me, hey, you know, it's 64 degrees down here, and it's 25 in Boise. I'm like, dang it, I'm probably better move down there. So about 6 months later, we decided to move down, and we moved near them in Arkansas to a place called Poto.
Okay.
But so that brought us kind of down to the Midwest, to Oklahoma area. But there was a little lesson I learned right before he moved that kind of changed my life and made me get into real estate a little bit more, and it's this. When he farmed from the time I was a little kid until I was about 24 years old, right when I was graduating from college, and he worked his tail off. In fact, that's something I learned from my dad, hard work.
Yeah.
And he worked really hard. Crops are hard. It's hard to make money. It's hard to make a really good living. And so he didn't make a lot of money, but he definitely worked hard, and I think he was a smart guy and all of that. But when he decided to move to Arkansas, he sold all his equipment and tractors and everything that he'd been working to gain for all those years.
How many years do you think that was?
20.
So basically everything that he had built over the last 20 years, his business, his life work.
Everything was in this equipment. So if he'd make a little money, he'd buy a new tractor or he'd buy a plow or whatever he needed for the farm.
So a farmer's wealth is really in the value of his land. And
all their stuff. And that's how I am too. I don't have much money in the bank, but I got assets that are worth some money.
Yeah.
But when my dad went to move, he said, I'm going to have an auction. I'm going to sell all my equipment. So he hired an auction company. They came, and all this equipment that he'd worked to acquire for 20 years, he sold for about $120,000. 20 years worth of work, and all of his blood, sweat, and tears, he got 120 grand. And interestingly, when I was in high school, he bought an 80-acre farm, and we moved onto this farm with a little house and all of that. I think he paid about $160,000 for it, about $2,000 an acre for this 80 acres. When he moved to Arkansas, about 8 years later, he sold that farm for $540,000 or something. So I thought to myself, all of the work he did for 20 years, he walked away with $120,000. Of course, he made a living during that and paid the bills and stuff. But he bought one farm, lived there for 8 years, sold it for a $400,000 profit just by buying and selling one farm. And I just thought to myself, kind of like I did with the straw earlier, I thought, all of that hard work for 120, and he made one purchase and one sale for 400. And I thought, when I have the money and can get some land, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy and sell land. And that's what I've done. And I'm a cattle rancher, but I make more of my money from buying and selling land than from the cattle by far.
So explain to us how you got there, because you said at the beginning of the podcast, cattle ranching is really hard to get into. And it sounds like, if I could be frank, it sounds like your dad didn't really walk away with much money. He just basically traded straight up what he had for the next farm in Arkansas. Maybe he got a little bit better farm there. So obviously he wasn't the one, financing you building your farm and stuff like that. So how did you go from, the small farm that you had in Arkansas or in Poto to what you have now? We're talking 5,000 acres, 1,200 cows.
Yeah.
Land everywhere,
One thing you got to consider is that it doesn't all happen overnight. And I think that's something that young people need to learn. They think that, man, if I do it right, I'm going to have all of this. No, you can, but it takes a long time. Yeah. And my dad did help me. He signed on a few loans and stuff like that. But he didn't just have money that he could give me or lend me or anything. But he did help me, like he'd let me use his tractor and stuff like that. Farming is incredibly difficult to get into, farming and ranching. So if I was a young guy trying to get into farming right now, it's virtually impossible. Land's about $2,500 an acre. To run one cow, you need about 4 acres of land.
So 10 grand.
So 10 grand to run one cow.
And how much does a cow cost?
The cow costs you $1,500. So now you're at $11,500 just to have 4 acres and one cow. So let's just say you wanted to run 100 cows. You'd need 400 acres at $2,500 an acre, is about $1 million. Okay, I'm 22 years old, just graduated from college. I don't have $1 million.
Right.
Not to mention 100 cows isn't enough to really make any kind of a living on anyways.
Right.
So the other thing is, so even if you had that, you've got 100 cows, and do you have equipment? Do you have a pickup and a tractor and all this to take care of those cattle? That costs a bunch of money too. So getting into farming and ranching is almost impossible. There's about 3 ways that you can do it. One is inherit it. And really, lots of people do.
Yeah.
My dad, what if all of his farms had been paid for and stuff, and he said, Bryan, you take these farms and just go ahead. And that's how a lot of young farmers get in. They inherit the farms. Their parents help them get in. Second way is to make your money somewhere else and then take that money. Let's say you made $1 million.
Right.
Now I can go buy that farm and buy the cattle, and I can make it work. And the third way, and this is the way most people do it, is you have a side job. Your job pays your bills, and your cattle, you're hoping that you can just get them going. Mm-hmm. In fact, my uncle Daryl, who lives in Idaho, he was a school teacher, and he just had a few cows on the side and bought a little bit of land. And I can't say this for 100% certainty, but I can almost guarantee the land and the cattle, he's in his 70s, early 70s now.
Sure.
His land and cattle are worth a lot more money than anything he saved for retirement from the school. Because the land that he bought when he was 30 years old is worth 10 times more than he paid for it.
Right.
So he probably, even though he never cash flowed much money off of those cattle, he has the value in that land now. The farmer you see driving around with the clunker old truck, he's probably got $15 million worth of land. That's how farmers get rich. They have no money their entire life, but they retire filthy rich because they gained wealth as they went.
Right.
So my thought was, instead of having nothing my whole life and then being rich when I'm older, if I can flip these farms, then I can have cash flow as I go.
Right.
So my thought was just doing exactly like my dad did. If I can just buy little farms and put some cattle on it, and if the cattle can make most of the payment, they can't quite make the whole payment because my bank requires 25% down. So let's just say, for easy numbers, I buy a $500,000 farm. That means I need to put $125,000 down, 25% down. So I'm financing $375,000.
Right.
Well, the cows have a really rough time paying the payment on that $375,000, but they can come close.
Okay.
So I can't just do it as a full-time living because they're barely making the payment. More or less, how am I going to put food on the table?
Sure.
So I started other businesses and did other jobs and things because I thought to myself, if I can bring in enough money to pay for our living and the cattle can just break even, that's going to build and it's going to get bigger, and the cattle and the land are going to be worth more money as we go. So that was kind of my idea, and you just got to start small because no bank's going to lend me a ton of money. Mm-hmm. I remember the first farm I bought was like 52 acres over near Tahlequah, Oklahoma. I went and bought it, and it was just this tiny little farm. I put 20 cows out there. I think I paid about $120,000 for it. And I just listed it for $160,000. And I thought, if it sells, I make $40,000. If not, the cows are pretty much making the payment anyway, so I'm okay. Well, after a couple of months, I sold it. I made $40,000 in 3 months. Whereas, and it wasn't really that much work. I just put a few cows out there. This was kind of before Craigslist and all that kind of thing. Now you can sell things online. Mm-hmm. I just put a few ads in the newspaper and kind of spread word. Somebody saw it. They saw a sign that I'd put up. Called, sold it. At the time, I worked a job that was paying me $40,000 a year. And I thought, so I work all year long for $40,000. I bought one farm, sold it in 3 months, made $40,000 just off that farm. And I knew I was in love. That's what I was doing for the rest of my life.
How, so like obviously I met you when if you're 51.
Yeah.
So I met you when you were probably 43, 44. What was it like early on? I mean, you have 8 kids.
Yeah.
For the viewers that don't know. And you guys had them so close to it. And obviously Donna's a saint. Like Donna is one of the hardest working people that I know.
Yeah.
But you're also extremely hardworking. And I don't think a lot of people I didn't see, for example, the sacrifice that you had to make as a young father and growing up. Like, what did your daily schedule look like when you were grinding through working a job and trying to do this cattle land flipping thing and everything like that?
So we had just gotten started, like you said, and you're young, you're trying to get it going. I made one little land flip, and I kind of realized, I thought, I need to make a little more money. Mm-hmm. Luckily, I had a college degree, and I was able to get a job in Houston, Texas at Continental Airlines. Went down there, I was working, and I still had a little farm in Oklahoma that my dad kind of watched after for me while I was down there. I was only there 6 months. on 9/11/2001. And when that happened, I'm in the airline industry. The airline industry went all to heck. I mean, everybody was in trouble. And I got canned. Basically, they just said, anybody who's been here less than a year, sayonara.
Sure.
You're done. So there I was saying, okay, I got to start over again. But to be totally honest, sometimes in life, the things that you think are a curse are one of the biggest blessings. I ended up working for myself at that point.
Yeah.
I just thought, you know what? I love cattle. I know how to kind of flip land. So I went back. I moved to Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Was about an hour from my parents where they lived. And I actually got another job, but I was back in the country where I could run. And I started buying a few more cows. Even the place that I lived, we bought 20 acres and we built a little house on the 20. I split off 5 acres and sold 5 acres to somebody for the same price that I'd paid for the entire 20 acres. So then I had a house on 15 acres and all the land was paid for because I had sold this 5 acres. So then I took the money I got from that 5 acres and I went and bought another little tiny farm. In the meantime, we're kind of struggling. I mean, we always had food on the table and all that. It was never a horrible struggle. We were never destitute. But it was like, okay, we can't go out to dinner that often because here's the crazy thing. We probably could have. But instead of taking that money and spending it on an expensive dinner, I'd invest into more land and into more cattle because I knew they were going to grow and that they would be way more valuable 5 years from now. And I can eat noodles at home.
So the thought process there is, I'm going to suffer a little bit right now so that I can live a lot better.
Just like we were saying earlier, sacrifice is giving up something now for something better later. And I was willing to do that. And so was my wife. And it wasn't that huge of a sacrifice. We were happy. You know, I think little kids don't even know that they're poor unless there's no food on the table.
Yeah.
But you know, I'd go out on the back deck literally every night and throw the football to my kids because I loved it and they loved it. They'd run out and I'd throw the ball to them and we'd kick the ball around and throw the Frisbee. And we just had a really, really good time. And I'd take them out on the farm and work with them. And that was fun too. So I think I was helping to teach them some good work ethic as well so that they could grow up and be hard workers. But it was just slow. I mean, not a lot of money, just starting to flip a little bit of land. And then something happened that completely changed us forever is my brothers and I had sold pest control in California. We'd just go door to door and we'd talk to people and we'd sell them pest control. And we worked for a company in California that would pay us to sell pest control. We did that when I was in college in like 1995, 96.
In your 20s.
Yeah. And that was just a nice summer job. Well, my brothers and I would talk to each other quite a bit. And we'd be like, hey, we ought to work together. Because we all loved each other and we wanted to spend time together. And we all kind of had that entrepreneurial spirit because we'd grown up on a farm and all of that. I said, well, what can we do together? And we just kind of looked around at each other and we're like, you know what? We know how to do pest control. We don't really know how to do it. We don't know how to kill bugs, but we know how to get accounts. And if we can get customers, surely we can learn how to kill bugs. So in 2004, we just said, let's do it. I quit my job. I sold my farm and house and most of my cattle. I took a bunch of them to my dad's and left them there because I couldn't give up on my cattle. I loved them too much. And I moved to Edmond, Oklahoma. And so did my brother Dennis and my brother Aaron.
So this was just a total gamble.
Yeah, I was 32 years old. But we went and took some classes on how to kill bugs, and we had to get licensed. So we went to Oklahoma State University, and we got all these licenses. And we sold everything. And I remember the day we went to knock doors the first time, we just looked at each other and said, what in the world are we doing? We just sold everything we have to start a brand new business. And so it was kind of crazy. We went out and knocked doors. We got cell phones. The first time I'd ever had a cell phone, actually. And about 10 doors in, I made a sale, and I called my brother and I said, I just made a sale. He said, I made one too. And we were so excited because we knew this thing was going to work.
That's awesome. You literally just walked away from what your life work was at that point to chase an opportunity you guys didn't know would work out. You guys get your first 2 sales, right, in that first day. And what happened with that business? Tell me about that experience, the trials that you guys had to go through, the setbacks, and then ultimately, what you learned from that experience.
We learned a lot. We actually made more than 2 sales. We had 2 sales in the first 10 minutes. So we're like, wow, this is going to work. Of course, there were trials. We didn't have any money. The only money we had was the money that I had from selling my farm and house back in Tahlequah. So I think we had about 60 grand sitting in our bank account, but that goes fast when you got to buy trucks and equipment and all the things.
So you're using personal finances to finance this thing.
We didn't have any other way to get money. So I just said to my brothers, I'll lend the money, pay me back eventually. Let's get this going. So that first night, I think we made about 8 sales between 3 of us, and we were stoked. And we started setting them up for about a week out so that we could get a bunch of sales, and then we'd get our trucks going. We're out there spraying. We don't know really what we're doing, but we're kind of figuring it out as we go.
Sure.
I had a brother-in-law who was doing pest control down in Dallas, and he was so nice. I would call him up and ask him questions about, hey, man, how do I do this and that? And he'd help us, and that helped a lot. But we got better at it, but there were a lot of trials. So the 3 of us made all these sales, and we did pretty well that first year. I think we got about 450 accounts or something. We didn't even start till July the 20th because by the time we got our license and we were ready to go, it was July. So 400 accounts, and there were 3 of us kind of trying to make a living off of that. So we had to dig into that $60,000 that I had, but we knew that this was going to work. So we said, next year, let's bring in more salesmen. So we hired about 6 people to come in and help us sell. And you cannot do everything, and you got to realize that. You can't service all the accounts and sell them and run the office. You just can't do it. We kind of tried, and you run out of steam. You can't do it all.
Sure.
So you got to hire competent, good, trustworthy people to help you with that kind of thing. So we went out and we hired a bunch of people to help us that next summer. So that would have been the summer of 2005. We had about 7 or 8 salesmen, and then the 3 of us sold again too. We had a problem with growth. We were almost growing too fast. And to pay these salesmen, we promised them quite a bit of money. So this $60,000 is starting to get kind of low. But at the same time, the accounts are generating a little bit of money. So it's a little bit scary, but at the same time, it's really exciting.
Yeah.
You've done it.
Yeah.
Starting your own business is so exciting. We would get to the office at 7 a.m. or 6:30, make sure our routes were ready to go. And we had 3 trucks that first summer that were running, and you'd have to have a good route. You don't want them going to the north end of town and then all the way to the south. So you got to have your salesmen schedule them properly. And we had nightmares trying to get all that together.
Sure.
And that's just growing pains, and it was part of it. But we'd work from 6 a.m. till midnight, and it was fun because you're building something. Not to mention you're doing it with your brothers.
Yeah.
I'm there with my brothers, and we're just working and having a great time. Here's an interesting thing. So eventually 3 other brothers joined us. This is kind of going down the road a little further. But 6 brothers were working together. In fact, we renamed our pest control company 6 Brothers Pest Control. It's kind of hokey, but people think it's funny. And they're like, really? Are there really 6 of you?
Yeah.
But it's interesting. If you tell people, I work with my 6 brothers, the very first thing they say is, how in the world can you guys all get along?
That's my thought too.
And the answer is, you just got to let stuff go. You're going to have your arguments. You're going to have disagreements. Let it go.
Yeah.
So in fact, our secretaries would laugh at us because we'd be in the conference room yelling at each other. And they could see us through the window yelling at each other.
Yeah.
And then literally 5 minutes later, we're laughing and talking, and you just got to let stuff go. And I think that's true not just in business, but in life too. You can hold grudges and be mad at people, or you can let stuff go. just like you were saying, what are some of the things you learned from your mission? I learned how to get along with a companion who was completely different than me. I spent 24 hours a day with him for 3 months. I had to learn how to like people, not just tolerate, but actually like people that are completely different than me. Anyway, we'd argue with each other, and then 7 minutes later, it's like, hey, where do you want to eat lunch, guys? You just let it go. You got to get on with your life. Otherwise, you cannot do business together. There's too many little things that'll ruin it.
Yeah.
Just let it go. And that's a lesson that I've learned in business. You can't let things bother you or ruin your relationship. In fact, here's something really interesting. Just yesterday, my son, Lyndon, works with me, and he was talking about a property he was trying to buy. The seller wanted $219,000 and he offered $180,000. They came down to $210,000. He went up to about $192,000 or something. And he's like, I don't want to pay any more than that. And it just ticks me off that they won't come down any. And he's like, I'm not going to buy it just because they're unwilling to move. And I said, you can't let emotion rule you. You need to decide whether it's a good deal or not, no matter what the negotiation is. I said, what if they had it listed for $300,000 and they came down to $210,000? Then would it be a good deal? It doesn't matter what they're doing on their end. You need to decide if this is a good deal for you. Don't let your emotion rule what you're doing.
Yeah.
So he kind of thought about that, and he was like, that makes sense. If it's worth $210,000, it's worth $210,000. But it just bothers me that they won't come down.
Yeah, some of the worst business decisions I've ever made were in the heat of the moment with emotion. Yeah. And I've had a lot of setbacks because of that. So I think you're right. So you guys had the pest control company. Obviously, you don't do pest control anymore. So talk about how you went from doing pest control and transitioning into full-time cattle.
Okay. That's actually really cool because pest control was cool. I loved working with my brothers, but it wasn't my passion. Killing bugs isn't my passion.
Right.
When I was 11, I wanted to be a cattle rancher, and I still wanted to when I was 36. So during this time where we were growing, we started to make some money. Nothing big, In fact, I remember we each got $3,000 a month starting in 2005 after that second summer, and we thought we were big
Profit from the business.
Profits. We were just rolling those dividends, and we were getting them, and
heck yeah,
pretty excited. $3,000 isn't that much money, but at the time, I didn't have that many expenses. I could live on $3,000, and I could even take a little bit of that money, put it into farming. And so you
were able to raise 8 kids on $3,000 a month and still put a little bit into farming.
Yeah, but I did take a little bit. I had that $60,000 that we started the business with. So I was getting $3,000 a month, plus the business was paying back that loan to me.
Gotcha.
So I was getting a little extra. So we were living on a little more than $3,000. It's probably more like $3,500.
Yeah.
But because of that loan payback, I was getting about an extra $1,500 a month, and I said, hey, I can make a payment on a farm with this $1,500. Went to a bank, bought 80 acres, and we built a really nice house on that 80, and we still live there on that 80 in a big, nice house that we really enjoy. But I did that only making a few $1,000s a month. And so you don't have to be rich to achieve your dreams. In fact, cattle ranching is not great money. Yeah. As I've shown, it costs you so dang much just to get in.
Right.
But I love it. And I've kind of made the decision that happiness is what you do every day. There are too many people in the world who hate their jobs. They just do it to put food on the table. They do it 5 days a week, and on the weekends they party. I do this 7 days a week, and I love it. If people say, hey, what are your hobbies? Like, cattle ranching.
Yeah.
I love cattle. I like just being out there and driving. We drive the four-wheelers around, and it's just really good. But how I went from business into cattle ranching is kind of what I'm saying. I just started taking a little bit of my money, and I found another farm that was for sale, and I went back to the same banker, and he said, if you got the 25% down, you've kind of proven to us that you're going to make those payments. And so I bought another farm, In fact, it's kind of interesting. I bought that farm for $500 an acre, and I sold it for $850 2 months later. So I made $32,500 on an $80,000 investment. Well, interestingly, $80,000, if I only put 25% down, I put $20,000 down, sold the farm for $112,500. So I made $32,000 on a $20,000 investment. Technically, I was on the hook for the whole 80,
right?
But I only put 20 in cash to make 32.
Sure.
So that's kind of the thing that I try to do. My goal when I buy a farm is to double my down payment. So if I put $100,000 down on a farm, my goal is to make $100,000 on that farm.
So it sounds like even from the beginning when you weren't making that much money, you leverage yourself pretty heavy with the banks, right? How much do you leverage yourself now compared to, even back then?
So quite a bit less now. I'm still leveraged, but so what I've learned over time is, so that farm I was just telling you about that I paid $500 an acre for,
sure.
I sold it for $850 and thought I was a genius.
Yeah.
And I walked away with $32,000. I think I'm the greatest thing ever. That very farm is worth $2,000 an acre today. So what I learned from that is flipping land is awesome because it keeps the cash flow coming in. But you also need some long-term investments that you hold on to for longer because they're going to be worth a lot later. So I have big farms. I've got one out in a town called Wewoka. It's got 1,000 acres. And I think I'm probably going to hold on to that forever. And I hope I pass it on to my kids and grandkids someday. But that's a long-term investment. And at the same time, we're buying farms and we flip them and we sell those. And so your question was, how did I get from pest control into farming and ranching? So over time, we started making enough with our pest control business that I would only have to work about half a day and then I'd come out and work on the farm and we were making really good money. So I'd take any additional money and just put it in the farm. When you're taking money from an outside source and putting it into farming and ranching, you can really build quickly. The other thing my accountant says about farms, he said they are magical because everything is tax deductible. If you buy feed for your cattle, you write that off. If you buy a truck to feed your cattle, you write that off. Anything that could remotely be written off for cattle, you can.
Yeah.
And so even the money I was bringing in from pest control, I never paid taxes because I'd take it and invest it into cattle, which are this great tax write-off.
Right.
So that worked in my favor as well. So just over time, I was leveraged big time. So let's say that 15 years ago, I was worth $1 million. Well, my total gross worth was $4 million and I owed $3 million. So it's like, well, you're worth $1 million, but you got a lot of debt and you're leveraged like crazy. Well, over time, that's why I'm saying I keep some farms long-term and some are short-term. You start saying, okay, now I'm worth $2 million and I owe $2 million, but my gross worth is $4 million. And as that number goes up, you say, okay, the gross worth is now $5 million and I only owe $1 million.
Gotcha.
So you still have debt. I've still got lots of debt, but my debt to asset ratio has flip-flopped where my assets are worth a lot more than my debts now.
Yeah, I want to talk about that for a second because for me, that's something that I'm learning as a young business or entrepreneur is being comfortable with debt. Because my family growing up, it was always debt is evil, don't spend much money. We didn't have much money growing up, but my parents always made sure that, we were always trying to pay back debt. And so growing up, I was like, I don't want to have any debt, no debt whatsoever. And at first I managed my finances like that until I met you. And I heard you on a phone one day calling your banker and saying like, hey, Eric, I need $1.2 million. Yep, I'll send the down payment by a 5-second phone call. You're getting money. I'm like, how do you get that kind of capital? And I've realized that it's building relationships with banks, but also being comfortable leveraging that debt. And so for some people, I feel like you can sleep well at night having no debt, but for some people like you can sleep well at night while leveraging yourself. How hard are you leveraged right now?
A lot less than I was. Like right now, I probably have $2 million in debt, and every once in a while it gets scary. Right now, the Fed is raising interest rates.
Right.
So all my debt, I'm paying double what I was 3 years ago.
Sure.
So that gets scary, and you got to be careful and be able to manage that. But as long as your assets are outweighing your debt by quite a bit, you can sleep at night.
Yeah.
Because you say, worst case scenario, I'll have to sell the farm. If, let's say I owe $1 million on a farm. In fact, this is true of one of my farms. I owe $1 million on it, but it's worth $3 million. So I can sleep at night knowing, worst case scenario, in a fire sale, I could sell it for 2.5, pay off that debt, and have $1.5 million left.
So why wouldn't you go refinance a farm?
Right now?
Yeah.
Because interest rates are high.
Okay. That's it. Have you refinanced farms before to take out the money to purchase?
Yeah. I don't want, as I get older, I don't want my debt to go up. I want my debt to go down as I get older. But I don't want to miss opportunities.
Sure.
So it's got to be a really good opportunity for me to want to get into more debt. I mean, like really good. So we're still out there buying and selling land because it's what works for us. It's what we do. But I'm a little bit more cautious. Whereas, 15 years ago, it's like, that looks like a good deal. I'll get it. So one thing I've learned too is you can't be overly analytical about an investment because you'll talk yourself out of it every time. Sometimes talking yourself out of it is the right thing to do because you don't want to get into a bad investment. But if you overanalyze stuff too much, it's like, oh, the fences are no good on this farm. I don't want to buy it. Well, I say to myself, is it worth more than I'm paying for it? And if it is, I'm going to go after it. I'm going to try to buy it. I can put on new fences or whatever. So, and I always have a plan for a farm or for debt. Don't just go into debt. In fact, your parents said debt's evil, basically, is what you said. And I actually kind of agree with that when it just comes to personal wasted debt.
Sure.
So I'm going to go blow a bunch of money living outside of my means because I'm irresponsible. That's bad debt.
Sure.
I think there's such a good thing as good debt.
Yeah.
I mean, are you going to wait till you have cash to buy a house? I'd say that's probably good debt to have a little bit of debt on a house. It's better than paying rent that's just flying away.
Sure.
At least you're getting some equity in that house. So debt is a little bit of a scary thing, but if you do the numbers and you realize, hey, this thing's going to work, it's like the first $60,000 that I lent to our business. I was scared until we started bringing in some money, and it's like, hey, I'm going to get my $60,000 back, and we're going to make a nice business out of this. So what ended up happening with our pest control business, we ended up selling it out, and I basically took the money from that, paid a lot of debt, and bought a couple more farms. And so what I did is I just went slowly. And if there's any lesson that somebody should learn from me is stuff doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
I'm 51 and I'm finally kind of where I want to be with my land values and cattle and I always try to keep in perspective family. Just my family's the most important thing in my life, and it's interesting. People say that all the time.
Yeah.
And yet 90% of their time is spent at work or at their job and even me, I'm always thinking about cattle and land and how can I do better? And yet I say that family's my priority. And so I try to actually take time every day to spend time with family and to build relationships and to make my wife happy, to make my children happy, and to love each other. And so that's something that I try to do too, is be well-rounded. Life isn't just about business. It's about a lot of different things. And so I'm trying to be well-rounded in my life as well.
What does it profit you to own the world and have no one to share it with?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Bryan, I appreciate you coming on and giving us your story and talking, I think, a lesson about, one, hard work, but two, patience to accomplish your dreams. Now, the thing about this podcast and the people that we bring on is they haven't quite made it yet. When I say made it, they're not, retired.
Yeah.
And I think for people like you and me is I don't think retirement's ever going to happen because we love to work. But what's the next phase for Bryan Christensen? What does your life look like in 5 to 10 years? What's the vision there?
I actually think what you're saying is exactly true of me. In fact, I originally started working my tail off thinking, hey, when I'm 45 or 50, I can retire and take it easy. Well, guess what? I love what I'm doing, so why would I retire?
Right.
So what I think is going to happen, in fact, this is kind of my goal, is to semi-retire. I want to, instead of, I've got, like you said, I've got 4,500 or 5,000 acres and 1,300 cows, and it is a lot of work. So I think eventually over the next 5 years, just sell some of those farms, pay off all my debt, still have cows, just not so many. Sure. I can work as hard as I want, or I can travel and take days off and stuff like that. So I think for me, semi-retired would be awesome, where I can still have a purpose. You know, I've seen people retire and they're just like, what am I supposed to do with myself now?
Yeah.
Hey, I can still run the cows. I just don't have to work so hard. And so I see myself doing that. But getting out of debt is one of my goals. Right now, I'm not that worried about it. As long as my debt is manageable, that's cool. But over time, I just want to get out of debt and kind of slow things down a little bit. Be able to travel with my wife and kids and spend more time with my grandkids and things like that. So I don't see myself ever retiring, but someday just being way less busy. I've told my wife my dream scenario of how I drop dead is that I'm going to be out checking the cows and I'm going to go walk. I'm going to get out of my truck. I'm going to have a heart attack and drop dead when I'm 93 years old.
Just to the middle of the field.
Somebody's just going to find me out in the field dead. That's how I want to go. Just having a good time, doing what I love doing, still working and still being out there doing something, and just dropping dead while I'm doing it. So I have no intention of ever retiring, but I do want to take it a lot slower at some point.
That's awesome. Well, Bryan, thanks for coming on the show.
Yep.
Anybody that is looking for cattle to purchase in March, Christensen Angus Farms are having your cattle sale when?
Oh, that's true. March the 10th, we have a sale on the second Friday of March every year. We sell a whole bunch of bulls and females and stuff like that. That's where we bring in most of our cattle income.
If you guys are looking to go to a cattle sale in Oklahoma,
give
March,
me a call.
You're invited.
You bet.
Christensen Angus, thanks for coming on the show, Bryan.
Hey, you bet.
Appreciate you.
Good being here.